Last week, I watched a colleague of mine, Elias, nearly have a meltdown because the office fluorescent lights were humming in B-flat. To everyone else, the room was silent. To the rest of the team, Elias was just being difficult again. They saw his sensitivity as a flaw, a fundamental deficit in someone who simply couldn't cope with a normal professional environment. But then something happened. Our server room's cooling system failed, and the automated alarms didn't trigger. While the rest of us were buried in our emails, oblivious to the impending hardware meltdown, Elias was already at the door with a technician. He hadn't seen a warning light. He'd heard the pitch of the cooling fans shift by a fraction of a semitone from across the hall. In that moment, he wasn't impaired. He was the only person in the building whose sensory smoke detector was actually working. It made me realize how quickly we label a specialized tool as broken just because we're using it for the wrong job. We've been taught to view neurodiversity through the lens of what's missing, a lack of social intuition or a struggle with eye contact. But a landmark study from 2026 is flipping that script entirely. It suggests that what we call a disorder is actually a high-performance cognitive trade-off that was once the backbone of human survival. What if the autistic mind isn't a collection of glitches, but a highly tuned systemizing module that evolution kept around for a very specific vital reason? What if the real problem isn't the brain itself, but a modern world that has become a supernormal stimulus, an environment so loud and socially chaotic that it has turned an ancient survival advantage into a modern disability? To understand why some brains work this way, we have to stop looking at clinical manuals and start looking at the evolutionary kludge that built us. Okay, so let's unpack this. The premise we're diving into today is it's truly transformative. We're talking about shifting the entire understanding of neurodiversity, specifically things like ADHD and autism spectrum traits, away from this, clinical deficit model, and looking at it as a powerful evolutionary mechanism that's just incompatible with our current environment. The dysfunction in this view is a function of ecological mismatch, not personal defect.
Exactly. We're looking at something called the Neurocognitive Mismatch Theory, or NMT. And this framework, it radically reconceptualizes neurodiversity. It argues that the traits we associate with ADHD and ASD are not random pathological glitches. Instead, they're biologically conserved variations that were, highly adaptive in our ancestral environments, maybe even essential for the group to survive, but they become profoundly destabilized and distressing under the chronic stress and overstimulation of modern market-based civilization. The whole mission of this deep dive is to show you why the issue is really the environment, not the internal wiring.
So we have to start by setting the foundation here. The story of Elias catching that B-flat hum, it makes it so clear that what looks like a deficit hypersensitivity is actually a superior skill in the right context. So why, structurally, are we moving away from that medical view that ADHD and ASD are fundamentally disorders?
Well, this shift is really being driven by the neurodiversity movement. It argues these are just normal variations in how brains develop, reflecting the natural ecology of the human brain. They're not pathologies that need a cure. The historical problem is really in the language we use, which comes from clinical psychiatry and focuses almost entirely on the struggles, the deficits, the impairments. And if you only study the failure points, you're going to miss the inherent value. We have to introduce a strengths-based view that gives equal weight to the cognitive benefits.
Let's lay those benefits out because they often get completely overlooked in the popular discussion. What does the evidence say about the strengths that are linked to the autism spectrum?
Oh, the evidence is compelling. For individuals on the autism spectrum, you often see strengths like high intelligence, especially in structured areas, superior memory for facts and details, and what we call systemizing excellence.
Yeah.
These individuals often have an above-average observation of details, exactly like Elias detecting that tiny pitch shift, and specialist skills that let them pour all their energy into one highly productive area. When you measure them against neurotypical people in careers like science, math, technology, data analysis, they often perform at an exceptional, sometimes even superior level.
Okay, and what about the ADHD profile? It's so often characterized by movement and rapid attention shifts, which, feel completely at odds with modern productivity. Where's the evolutionary strength in that?
The ADHD profile is associated with a couple of crucial, often complementary strengths. First, you get these enhanced capabilities in creative thinking and divergent problem solving. That's the ability to jump laterally between ideas that seem unrelated to find a totally new solution. Second, superior visuospatial reasoning, which is essential for quickly assessing a dynamic, changing environment. And on top of that, the profile is linked to courage and risk-taking. And while sure, those traits are a challenge in a standardized classroom, just imagine how valuable they would have been in an ancestral context. for roles demanding vigilance, exploration, or quick, high-stakes decisions.
It really feels like the very structure of our diagnostic system is the problem. It forces us to put a label on a person, implying there's this fixed defect, when what we're really describing are highly specialized dimensional traits.
Precisely. Both ADHD and ASD are dimensional. They exist on a spectrum across the entire human population. The real challenge, ethically and practically, is how we define a disorder. Realistically, that definition should hinge on whether the person is experiencing considerable suffering or distress. And we know that many neurodiverse individuals lead fulfilling, happy, and incredibly successful lives, which suggests that the difficulty isn't always the individual's brain function, but rather the failure of the environment to accommodate that function.
So reframing it like that completely flips the intervention strategy. Instead of, prescribing medication or therapy to make the person conform, we should be addressing the disabling environment.
That is the core idea of neurocognitive mismatch. The focus has to shift, and dramatically so. We need to focus on finding and fixing the aspects of the environment that are disabling for the individual, rather than pathologizing the individual for not fitting a mold. The traits themselves aren't good or bad. They're advantageous or disadvantageous depending entirely on the context. The neurodiversity concept, when it's supported by this evolutionary framework, it becomes a kind of civil rights demand for societal acceptance and accommodation. It pushes research away from just medical deficits and toward ecological and social factors.
Which brings us to this great evolutionary paradox. If ADHD and ASD were genuinely pathological, natural selection, which is a brutal editor, should have eliminated these traits, especially since they can cause problems long before reproductive age. The fact that they're still here suggests they must have conferred some kind of powerful benefit.
Exactly. We have to stop thinking about evolution as this race to create the strongest or the fastest organism. Evolution is all about the goodness of fit, the survival and reproduction of those who are best suited for their environmental niche. And for the vast majority of human history, something like 95% of it, that niche was the hunter-gatherer group.
Right, these small, tight-knit groups, maybe 50 to 150 people at most.
Right. And even if we use really conservative estimates, say 1% prevalence for ASD and 3% for ADHD, every single one of those ancestral groups likely had at least one or two neurodiverse individuals. The theoretical possibility, which NMT supports, is that these individuals held specialized roles or niches that benefited the entire group, allowing their traits to survive and be passed on. This idea of specialized minds suggests that evolution actually favored social niche specialization and a division of cognitive labor, which contributed immensely to our species' overall success.
Okay, let's dig into the specific cognitive mechanism that might have driven this, starting with adaptive bias and error management theory, or EMT. This is all about making smart, but not necessarily rational decisions under pressure.
EMT is crucial. It gives us a mechanism for understanding why a specialized, hypervigilant mind would be conserved by evolution. Adaptive bias suggests the brain evolved to reason adaptively, which means it prioritizes minimizing the overall cost of cognitive errors, especially when information is incomplete or uncertain. It's not interested in reducing the number of errors, just the severity of the catastrophic ones.
So we have two types of errors we're worried about, type I and type 2.
Precisely. A type I error is a false positive. You cry wolf when there is no wolf. A type 2 error is a false negative. You fail to see the wolf when it is, in fact, there. Error management theory explores what's called cost asymmetry. When the cost of a false positive, the type I error, is way lower than the cost of a false negative, the type 2 error, the system will bias itself toward minimizing the severe catastrophic error.
Can you connect this cost asymmetry back to Elias and his sensory sensitivity? That seems like a perfect example.
It's a perfect example. The sensory hypersensitivity we often see with the autism profile is this adaptive bias in action. Elias hears the B-flat hum or the tiny pitch shift in the cooling fan. That's a false alarm, right? It's a low-cost type I error. It might cause some temporary distraction or annoyance, but the cost is low. Now consider the catastrophic type 2 error. Failing to notice a life-threatening shift in sound, pattern, or the environment. Missing the subtle sign of a predator, or the shelter's integrity failing, or the shift in fan pitch that signals a server meltdown. That catastrophic error carries an existential cost.
So the brain system biases toward minimizing the existential threat. The payoff for being hypervigilant, even if it leads to a bunch of low-cost false alarms, is the preservation of life or critical resources.
It fundamentally reframes sensory processing. It's not a disorder. It's a high-fidelity system showing an adaptive bias, optimized for the role of a sentinel or a threat detection specialist within the group. You need this specialized mind, because if everyone in the group has a medium fidelity system, the probability of missing that truly crucial, subtle threat goes way, way up. Neurodiversity ensures at least one person is hyper-tuned to prevent the disaster.
We should also look at life history theory, which seems to link the entire profile ADHD or ASD to how dangerous the environment was over evolutionary time.
Life history theory is a macro-level evolutionary framework. It describes the unconscious strategy an organism follows when it comes to reproduction and investing its resources. And these strategies are determined by how stable and dangerous the environment is perceived to be.
So how does the ADHD profile fit into this theory of resource allocation?
The ADHD profile is typically associated with a fast life history. This strategy is characterized by prioritizing rapid development, early reproduction, and having more offspring. Behaviorally, this shows up as impulsivity, hyperactivity, and risk-taking traits that help you seize immediate opportunities. This strategy is highly adaptive in dangerous or harsh environments where resources are uncertain and mortality is high. If you might die tomorrow, investing heavily in delayed gratification is, well, it's counterproductive. You have to act now.
But doesn't prioritizing risk-taking put that individual at greater personal risk? How does natural selection balance the benefit to the group against the potential danger to the person with those fast life traits?
That's a critical question. And the balance works because the traits, while risky for one person in isolation, are valuable to the group. That exploratory drive, the risk-taking, often leads to discovering new resources or safer migration paths, which benefits everyone. Natural selection keeps this genetic variance because, while some individuals with the fast life profile might perish young, the ones who survive and reproduce pass on a kind of genetic insurance policy. Should the environment suddenly become harsh or unpredictable, the species has individuals already wired to thrive in chaos. Their high-energy, rapid-scanning approach lets them detect opportunities and threats quickly, which is a life-saving asset in dynamic, perilous situations.
Okay, so the fast life profile ADHD is a hedge against environmental catastrophe. What about the slow life profile that's associated with autism spectrum traits?
The ASD profile is often linked to a slow life history. This strategy involves delaying reproduction and investing a lot of resources in fewer young. Behaviorally, this requires deep specialization, high focus, and delayed resource acquisition to secure long-term stability. This is the optimal strategy in benign, safe, and resource-rich environments where your children are likely to reach adulthood, and success is determined by outcompeting your peers through specialized skill. The slow life strategy is all about long-term investment, planning, and mastery.
That distinction, fast for chaos, slow for stability, is a really powerful way to understand why both traits were preserved. Let's focus on the deep focus part of the slow life history with the solitary forager hypothesis for autism.
This hypothesis suggests that ASD traits represent a cognitive adaptation optimized for successful solitary hunting and gathering. If you look at the traits often seen in high-functioning autism, low gregariousness, reduced social interest, intense and specialized skill development, they actually mirror the necessary behaviors of successful solitary species.
But why would a human be a solitary forager? I thought we were a fundamentally social species.
Not everyone needs to be in the middle of the social group all the time. Imagine the specialized skill it would take to track a rare medicinal plant, or identify the subtle signs of a hidden cache of resources, or invent a complex trap. These tasks require incredible uninterrupted concentration, pattern recognition, and memory. The traits we call obsessive or repetitive today, when they were guided by the primal needs of hunger and thirst, would drive a relentless dedication to complex, high-yield food procurement. The intense systemizing focus would identify and exploit resource patterns that a more generalized, socially distracted mind would completely overlook.
So the very traits that make social interaction difficult now were the traits that made them successful inventors or specialist providers when they were alone.
Exactly. Exceptional memory and spatial skills, which are often noted in ASD, would be critical for survival during solitary foraging across scarce environments. Even characteristics like gaze aversion, which is a profound social challenge today, might have been an instinctual defense in the ancestral context. If a specialist forager encountered a dominant member of the group, avoiding eye contact could have been an adaptive behavior to signal non-challenge, allowing them to navigate hierarchies carefully or avoid confrontation entirely, thus protecting their valuable knowledge and specialization. It was an evolutionary trade-off between social integration and technical mastery.
This inherent drive for specialization, this hedging of bets by nature, is what you call differential susceptibility.
Yes. Nature ensures genetic variety. We can categorize individuals into dandelions, who are generally resilient and thrive pretty much anywhere, and orchids, who are highly sensitive and profoundly affected by both positive and negative experiences. Neurodiverse individuals often fall into that orchid category. They suffer more in harsh or unsupportive settings, but critically, they are capable of outperforming typical people in benign, supportive, and stimulating environments. By maintaining this genetic diversity, nature guarantees that no matter how the environment shifts in the future, whether it becomes benign or catastrophic, the species will always have some individuals who are primed to thrive.
So if group survival depended on specialization, we really need to understand the fundamental cognitive processes that create these divergent specializations. And the framework seems to hinge on this cognitive trade-off between empathizing and systemizing.
This trade-off is absolutely central to understanding the autism spectrum profile. While all of us possess both cognitive processes, it's the functional balance that determines our cognitive type. And this balance isn't just behavioral. It's rooted in deep evolutionary processes that selected for social competence versus technical competence.
Okay, let's define them clearly. What is empathizing, or E, and why is it so essential for human groups?
Empathizing is the drive to identify another person's emotions and thoughts, and then to respond with an appropriate emotion. It's fundamentally a social skill that needs two components: mind reading, which is interpreting human actions as being driven by mental states, and an effective response, which is the sympathy or feeling that drives an urge to help or cooperate. This system is essential for complex social interaction, for caregiving, and for maintaining group cohesion.
Okay, the material we looked at breaks the empathizing mechanism into several developmental components, and the acronyms are coming fast. We need to slow down and unpack how these systems build on each other from infancy for the listener.
That's fair. It can get a bit dense. The system evolves in stages. It starts with the most basic detection mechanisms. You have the intentionality detector, ID, and the I-direction detector, EDD. The ID lets an infant interpret movement as purposeful. That person wants that thing. The EDD is highly specialized. It automatically registers where another person is looking, giving you a rapid assessment of potential threats or objects of interest. These build what we call dyadic representations, like they see the cup.
So ID and EDD are the fundamental building blocks. They tell us who is doing what and where they're looking. What comes next?
Next up is the shared attention mechanism, SAM, which develops around 9 to 14 months. SAM is crucial because it allows for triadic recursive representations. An infant can now think, "Mother sees that I see the cup." This is the foundation of joint attention and social learning. It shows the infant understands that others have mental states directed to the same objects they do.
And finally, that brings us to the full empathizing system.
Yes, the final stage is the full empathizing system, TESS, which pulls all of this together to produce an appropriate affective response. It allows for a sympathetic reaction to another's emotional state, driving cooperation, caregiving, social learning, all the hallmarks of a successful social species. This entire chain, ID, EDD, SAM, and TESS, constitutes the E in the trade-off.
Okay, now let's pivot to systemizing, or S. If empathizing is about agentive systems, people. Systemizing sounds like the cognitive process for non-agentive systems things.
That's the perfect distinction. Systemizing is the drive to analyze or construct lawful systems. It means understanding the deterministic relationship between an input, an operation, and an output using if-then rules. It demands an exact eye for detail to treat a feature of an object as a variable and meticulously observe how that variable changes when you perform an operation on it.
We mentioned there are 6 types of systems the human brain analyzes. It's not just computers or math.
Correct. The brain is flexible. It systemizes technical systems like machines and tools, natural systems like weather or plant life, abstract systems like math, logic, and grammar, but also social systems like elections or legal codes, which do have lawful structures, organizable systems like a library or a collection, and motoric systems like a sports technique or playing a musical instrument. It's the drive for understanding structure, regularity, and predictability across all of these domains.
The source material we reviewed detailed 5 specific phases of systemizing. If we want to understand this high-performance mechanism, we really need to explore these in detail. What are the systemizer's sequential steps?
The process is systematic and relentless. First is analysis, phase 1. This is gathering data, recording single observations of an input and an output in a highly standardized way. Think of a data collector meticulously logging every train departure time or every tiny error in a piece of code. Second, operation, phase 2. Performing an operation on that input and noting the resulting change to the output. If I press this button operation, the screen turns blue. output. Third is repetition, phase 3. Repeating that exact same operation multiple times to confirm that the pattern between the input and the output is reliable. This is the foundation of routine and procedural perfection. Then you get to law derivation, phase 4, which is the critical creative leap, formulating a general rule. If X happens, then A changes to B, always. This allows for prediction and control. And finally, confirmation, disconfirmation, phase 5. Testing that derived law against all previous and future instances. The systemizer keeps the law if it holds true 100% of the time or modifies it based on new data. This is what separates true systemizers from generalists, that relentless drive for absolute lawfulness.
This entire process, the 5 phases, is optimized for systems that are deterministic and lawful. So why does this profound strength become such a huge liability in human interaction?
Because systemizing is highly effective only for things that are lawful, finite, and deterministic systems with low variance, where the rules don't change frequently. A systemizer can predict exactly when the sun will rise or how a computer program will run. But human behavior is complex, low lawful, and involves wide variance and many degrees of freedom. Trying to apply phase 4, law derivation, to something like dating or office politics is almost guaranteed to fail because the rules change based on context, emotion, and internal mental states that you just can't map as a consistent input operation output. To navigate that messiness, you need empathizing, not systemizing.
So this brings us to the hypersystemizing theory of autism. It proposes that the autism spectrum condition is the result of an extreme imbalance, impaired empathizing alongside hypersystemizing.
Exactly. The human brain has what we can call a systemizing mechanism, or SM, and you can think of it like a volume control. In people with ASC, that volume is set way too high, leading to what we call an extreme type S brain. Systemizing becomes the dominant mode of cognition, even when you're confronted with human inputs.
And how does that explain the typical behavioral things we see, like the love of routine or the fascination with collections?
Well, the manifestations are the direct result of this systemizer seeking out lawful systems. It explains the preference for predictability, mathematics, collections, train timetables, routines. And it explains the disability when they're confronted by unpredictable systems like social behavior. The repetitive behaviors we often see are a compensatory strategy to counter the overwhelming unpredictability of the world by creating an artificial time structure. A high-functioning individual might even try to socialize by hacking the social world, applying systemizing logic to low lawful social inputs by memorizing scripts or rules of engagement.
But the hypersystemizing also explains the exceptional ability.
Oh, absolutely. The ability to sustain focus on repetitive activities for long periods may have been crucial for incremental invention in our early history, assembling various elements until the most optimal configuration was achieved. This profile grants enhanced accuracy, speed, and precision in specific task performance, often surpassing neurotypical individuals whose cognitive resources are constantly being diverted by social monitoring and emotional processing.
This intense systemizing drive must be genetically conserved for a reason. And this leads us to the assortative mating hypothesis.
This hypothesis suggests that the genetic basis for ASC comes from the combination of having two strong systemizers as parents. Individuals with highly developed systemizing skills, often working in specialized scientific or technical fields, they tend to pair up. When two extreme S-type individuals reproduce, the systemizing volume control in their offspring can be set excessively high, resulting in the ASC profile.
And what evidence do we have for this pattern?
We see clear evidence of this genetic clustering. Studies show that fathers and grandfathers of children with ASC are significantly more likely to work in engineering, mathematics, and technical fields. And what's more, parents of children with autism show hypermasculinized patterns of brain activity during systemizing tasks compared to control parents. This mechanism helps explain why genes related to social difficulty have been maintained in the gene pool, because they conferred high fitness advantages through the exceptional systemizing skills that were demonstrated by the first-degree relatives in technical and inventive domains.
We've thoroughly established that these traits were specialized and adaptive. So now let's address the core problem, the neurocognitive mismatch. If the traits are adaptive, why are they associated with clinical impairment and distress today?
The core argument is simple. Modern, market-based civilization, especially post-industrial and digital society, is just structurally misaligned with our evolved cognition. It creates an emergent dysfunction. We're forcing specialized ancient tools into rigid systems that demand conformity and generalization.
So what are the structural elements of modernity that clash so fundamentally with these evolved human traits?
We've created environments that reward delayed gratification, which is evolutionarily novel. We demand uninterrupted focus on abstract, often meaningless tasks, and require high social compliance in hierarchical, sedentary institutions like schools and offices. And on top of all that, modern urban and digital life introduces this overwhelming sensory overstimulation and chronic psychosocial stress that the evolved brain is simply not equipped to manage, especially for those with pre-existing sensitivities.
Let's break down the specific mismatch pathways, starting with the ADHD profile. Beyond just the challenge of delayed gratification, what are the key conflicts?
The ADHD environment mismatch is multi-layered. First, you have the dopaminergic system, which evolved to prioritize immediate reward, spotting a resource and capitalizing on it immediately. That clashes violently with modern demands for abstract long-term planning and years of schooling before any kind of payoff. Second, the fundamental need for movement or hyperactivity, it conflicts with the enforced sedentary expectations of classrooms and offices.
And we have to consider the nature of modern work. It's often abstract and bureaucratically complex, demanding sustained attention on these low salience tasks.
Exactly. The rapid attention shifting or scanning of the ADHD profile, which was crucial for sentinel roles in dynamic environments, it becomes a liability when you're faced with the modern demand for sustained attention on abstract reports. Yet furthermore, the divergent thinking style of the ADHD brain, which excels at rapid problem solving and innovation in concrete environments, is often punished in bureaucratic, highly structured abstract tasks that demand linear, convergent thinking and adherence to rigid processes. The environment actively suppresses the core adaptive skills of the individual.
Okay, now for the autism environment mismatch. Elias's story highlights the sensory overload, but what about the cognitive clash?
The clash is both sensory and cognitive. Heightened sensory processing, that incredible ability to process minute details, was potentially adaptive for monitoring less complex, more predictable ancestral environments. But in a chaotic, high-frequency urban and digital context, this precision turns into overwhelming overload. Cognitively, the detail-focused hypersystemizing mind clashes directly with modern demands for rapid task switching and handling increasingly complex and often deceptive social and organizational structures. The systemizer wants stable rules. Modern life delivers fluid, ambiguous, and rapidly changing social expectations.
So the environment isn't just misaligned, it's biologically destabilizing these specialized traits. How does modern life physically injure or impair the specialized brain?
We can trace this through a few key biological destabilization pathways. The primary factor is chronic stress. Psychosocial stressors, driven by things like inequality, poverty, and high-demand work environments, they create a state we call allostatic load.
We need to unpack that term, allostatic load. What exactly does that mean for the brain?
Think of it this way. Your body has a system for managing stress called allostasis, which helps you achieve stability through change-like releasing cortisol to respond to a threat. Allostatic load is the cumulative wear and tear on your body and brain when that system is chronically overused. It's like running your car engine at redline all day, every day. This chronic overload disrupts critical cortisol regulation and actively impairs neurodevelopment, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which is the region that governs crucial executive functions like impulse control, planning, and sustained attention.
So chronic stress doesn't cause ADHD or ASD, but it compounds the instability of these predisposing profiles, leading to far more severe functional impairments.
Precisely. Brain imaging confirms that chronic stress, poverty, and exposure to early adversity reduce gray matter volume in regions vital for executive function. This isn't evidence of a defective design. It's an adaptive system that is being actively degraded by hostile, chronic environmental inputs. The instability is an emergent reaction to the load.
And what role do toxins and diet play in this destabilization?
They're powerful amplifiers. Environmental toxins, pesticides, lead, air pollution, even microplastics are known to increase neuroinflammation and exacerbate attention regulation problems and executive function deficits. While these factors affect everyone, their impact is disproportionately amplified in those who are already struggling with sensory or regulatory profiles. And beyond that, we know that for a subset of susceptible individuals, common dietary components like artificial colors and preservatives contribute measurably to the severity of ADHD symptoms. A brain under constant biochemical assault is poorly positioned to manage the demands of modern life.
We also have to consider the unique role of digital technology, which is a massive source of modern stress.
Digital stress creates these attention-fragmenting environments. The constant rapid-fire sensory inputs and the need for continuous vigilance imposed by digital media just intensify cognitive demands. Exposure, especially during critical developmental periods, has been linked to attention problems. The prefrontal cortex, which is already managing a high allostatic load from life stressors, is further overwhelmed by the relentless high-frequency stimulation, which just intensifies the instability of regulatory systems.
And this complexity extends beyond the individual, reaching across generations. That's the mechanism of intergenerational transmission. How does the environment start influencing neurodevelopment even before birth?
This is where the concept of in utero programming becomes so critical. The developing fetus is constantly monitoring the maternal environment for signals about the world it's about to enter.
And what signal does elevated maternal stress send?
Elevated maternal stress hormones, specifically cortisol, act as a predictive environmental weather report. High cortisol levels signal danger, unpredictability, and harshness to the fetus. The developing neural system, in an adaptive response, recalibrates itself towards survival traits. Heightened vigilance, sensory reactivity, and impulsivity. It's like a survival mechanism deciding, I need to be ready for a hurricane. This is not a genetic mutation. It's an environmentally induced adaptation where the developing brain adapts to signals of a treacherous high-mortality environment by prioritizing speed and vigilance, which later manifests as profiles that struggle in slow, compliant, stable settings like a modern classroom.
And the research now shows the father's environment plays an epigenetic role, even before conception.
Yes, paternal contributions are increasingly recognized as significant. Studies on male rodents, for instance, show that chronic stress alters the epigenetic content of their sperm, changing DNA methylation and microRNA profiles. This influences the offspring's stress reactivity and brain development. And while establishing direct causation in humans is complex, the data suggests that chronic stress in fathers can pass on epigenetic markers to offspring, increasing the risk of neurodevelopmental challenges. This highlights that the rising psychosocial stress inherent in our post-industrial societies acts as a transgenerational amplifier of these neurocognitive mismatch effects.
So if the neurocognitive mismatch theory holds true, then the pathology really lies in the structure of the world, and the intervention has to be systemic redesign. We have to move away from the medical model's focus on individual correction.
Absolutely. The traditional deficit-based medical model focused on symptom suppression, it often serves institutional incentives, sedating students for conformity, enforcing standardized compliance, but it fails the individual. We need an ecological model that values difference. The realization that heritability and neurological divergence are evidence of natural variation, not defect, forces us to shift our focus to supportive environmental design.
Let's address the role of medication within this framework. How should we view pharmacological interventions like stimulants if the problem is the environment?
We view them with caution, prioritizing ecology first. Stimulant medication is a powerful tool, and it can offer short-term relief. But the NMT framework encourages it to follow, not precede, robust environmental and behavioral supports. We have to acknowledge that long-term stimulant use can alter baseline attention, cause receptor downregulation, and lead to dependency. Prioritizing interventions that harness the brain's natural neuroplasticity avoids converting short-term relief into lifelong pharmacological reliance.
Okay, so what are these non-pharmacological interventions that harness neuroplasticity?
We have several validated approaches. Cognitive training, like programs such as CogMed, focuses on structured, repetitive working memory exercises designed to strengthen the prefrontal parietal networks. These programs show measurable, sustained improvements in executive function because they teach the brain how to manage cognitive load rather than just masking the symptoms.
And for managing the immense stress load that modern life imposes,
mindfulness and biofeedback interventions are essential. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and similar practices improve emotional regulation and teach metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thoughts and reactions without immediately acting on them. This strengthens the individual's ability to self-manage anxiety and reactivity, strengthening the very neural pathways that are destabilized by chronic stress.
We also have to address the core sensory and movement needs that modern environments suppress.
That requires structured sensory integration and movement. For ASD profiles, this involves environmental modifications, like reducing the frequency of fluorescent lighting or providing noise-canceling headphones to reduce sensory bombardment. Tools like weighted blankets or compression garments provide consistent proprioceptive input that calms an overactive nervous system. For the ADHD profile, structured movement is medicine. Interventions like martial arts, dance, or complex sports not only channel hyperactivity, but also build executive function through the need to memorize complex motor sequences, inhibit impulsive movements, and require bilateral coordination. Movement is not a distraction, it's a mechanism for attention.
And finally, supporting the physical substrate of the brain through nutrition.
Nutritional support is a vital, non-pharmacological pillar. Omega-3 fatty acid supplementation has been shown to support executive function and reduce systemic inflammation. For susceptible individuals, eliminating known agitators like artificial colors and preservatives through structured diets can significantly reduce ADHD symptom severity. Furthermore, modulating the gut-brain axis using targeted probiotics supports optimal brain function and neurotransmitter production, addressing neural stability through metabolic rather than singular neurochemical pathways.
The theoretical shift is powerful, but the listener needs to know what systemic redesign actually looks like. So let's start with the most rigid environment, schools. How do we apply the mismatch model to educational transformation?
The standard classroom, 6 hours of seated, single-pace, standardized instruction, is the perfect example of a structurally misaligned environment. The redesign has to be fundamental. We have to implement movement-integrated learning. This means standing desks, balance balls, and mandated movement breaks every 20 to 30 minutes, not just a 10-minute recess. Programs that integrate physical activity directly into academic instruction have shown the way forward, boosting attention for all students, but especially those with ADHD profiles.
And addressing the different speeds of focus inherent in neurodiversity.
That requires flexible pacing through self-paced modular learning. This accommodates the intense hyperfocus periods beneficial to the autistic profile, letting them dive deep and spend 90 minutes on one subject. And it also accommodates the need for frequent topic switching, often required by the ADHD profile. Furthermore, sensory accommodations must be mandated. Quiet zones, accessible noise-canceling headphones for testing, and adjustable lighting in all learning environments. We have to shift curricula toward project-based learning that requires concrete, hands-on systemizing, moving away from abstract, low-salience written assignments.
The workplace is equally hostile, structured around this 9-to-5 open plan conformity model. What does workplace restructuring look like when you apply NMT?
We have to move toward creating cognitive diversity hubs. This starts with flexible scheduling, allowing individuals to align their work hours with their natural circadian rhythms, whether they're early birds or night owls. We need diverse workspace options. Private pods for the deep, focused work essential to the systemizer, and collaborative spaces for the high-energy, rapid-fire problem-solving that benefits the ADHD profile. Open plan offices, which are catastrophic generators of sensory overload, they have to be phased out in favor of variety.
And how do organizations leverage these specialized minds as a competitive advantage?
Through task specialization. The example of SAP's Autism at Work program is instructive. They don't just tolerate difference, they actively match profiles to job demands. Detail-oriented, hypersystemizing autistic profiles are assigned to precision roles like data validation, complex coding, and pattern recognition tasks, where their ability to derive laws in complex data sets surpasses neurotypical performance. Conversely, dynamic, rapid-thinking ADHD profiles are ideal for crisis response, rapid prototyping, or dynamic client management, where rapid attention shifting and creative problem-solving are essential. This isn't charity, it's leveraging the specialized cognitive ecology of the workforce.
Even the structure of our cities contributes to the mismatch. How do we apply these principles to urban planning?
We need sensory-conscious urban planning. Cities are overwhelming sensory environments. We have to design and invest in green corridors, extensive protected nature paths connecting neighborhoods, to provide restorative, low-frequency sensory refuges from the chaos. Designated quiet zones are essential within bustling commercial districts. Critically, investing in active transport infrastructure, like expansive, safe bike lanes and walking paths, supports the innate, suppressed movement needs of the population, reducing sedentary stress.
Okay, finally, what are the necessary policy recommendations to cement these systemic changes?
Policy has to mandate legislative and regulatory changes. We need to require cognitive accessibility standards in schools and workplaces, legally moving beyond physical disabilities to recognize and accommodate neurodevelopmental differences. This includes mandatory movement protocols and sensory accommodations in institutional settings. And furthermore, we must aggressively shift research funding priorities towards studies examining environmental modifications and supportive ecology rather than strictly pharmaceutical development. We need to direct resources toward creating environments that benefit the entire cognitive spectrum.
This really sounds like a powerful convergence, where the scientific insights of evolutionary psychiatry provide the grounding for the social goals of the neurodiversity movement.
They share significant common ground. Evolutionary psychiatry provides a scientific, objective explanation, while the neurodiversity movement is driven by social and political principles. But they share the ultimate goal of broadening the definition of normal, concentrating on strengths, rejecting the notion of a cure, and recognizing that environments, not brains, are primarily responsible for dysfunction.
And what's the shared benefit of this convergence?
Evolutionary psychiatry provides a robust scientific framework that can effectively reduce stigma by explaining neurodevelopmental conditions as part of the natural cognitive ecology. This approach is highly effective in convincing demographics, like policymakers in the scientific research community, who may be less swayed by purely social or political arguments, but who respond to evidence-based evolutionary logic. It reframes these traits not as individual failings, but as essential evolutionary trade-offs preserved for group fitness.
However, the two paradigms don't perfectly align, especially when you're addressing the inherent heterogeneity of complex conditions like autism. Where do they diverge productively?
Well, evolutionary psychiatry, because it's seeking objective scientific definitions, it naturally subtypes conditions. It notes that the adaptive systemizing explanations we've discussed, what you might call prototypical autism linked to the extreme type S brain, may differ from syndromic autism, that's linked to specific genetic or developmental pathologies, often accompanied by intellectual disability. These syndromic cases don't present the same evolutionary paradox and may require very different lines of support.
And why is acknowledging that nuance so important for the overall neurodiversity conversation?
This distinction is key to productive debate. If advocates lump all biological causes under one singular neurodiversity banner, critics might seize on the most impaired syndromic cases to dismiss the entire adaptive concept. EP helps address this complexity by recognizing that while the social banner can encompass all cognitive differences as a matter of principle, acknowledging distinct biological causes is useful for reducing confusion, ensuring targeted support, and preserving the scientific integrity of the adaptive mismatch argument against critics. By incorporating that complexity, the EP approach actually strengthens the overall call for systemic redesign.
This deep dive reveals that the traits we so often pathologize, from needing hyperfocus to responding to minute sensory details, are not evolutionary mistakes. They are specialized adaptive responses honed over millennia, preserved in the gene pool because they offered unique survival advantages, whether as sentinels, specialized toolmakers, or deep pattern systemizers. This neurocognitive diversity, which was once the essential strength of the collective, is simply struggling in a modern environment that demands uniformity and generalization.
The dysfunction we observe today is largely emergent. It's the result of forcing these specialized cognitive tools into a mass-produced, standardized system, the modern environment, that is fundamentally misaligned with human evolutionary design. We cannot medicate away a billion years of evolution. Shifting our perspective means recognizing that the responsibility lies not in fixing the person, but in redesigning the structure. When divergence is not merely tolerated but valued as an essential part of the cognitive ecology, we move toward a system that honors the full spectrum of human capacity.